listening to how AI is changing the world, how impressive it is, and I guess this panel is to bring us all back down to earth. What is the problem with AI right now? What could go wrong? What are the challenges we're facing? So, at its best, AI can save lives. It can make just decisions, decisions that are not colored by human biases. But at its worst, it could reinforce these biases and lead to very unfair decisions, which leads to a loss of trust in the technology. So we're here today with three very distinguished guests to talk about the topic of AI and data governance and ethical AI. How do we practice it? How can AI empower societies instead of hurt it? So maybe I would start off the panel with a very broad question, and if the panelists could, if you could give a very brief introduction to what you do, who you are, and just at the end of the introduction, talk about what you think is the most pressing issue facing AI, ethics, and data governance right now. Maarten, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. I'm Secretary General of the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy in the Netherlands. We have a broad portfolio within the ministry, and one of the issues that we're dealing with is digitization. We have the coordinating role within the government on digital policies. And one of the issues that we're dealing with is, of course, AI. That's what we're talking about today. And we recently published a national strategy, an action plan on artificial intelligence, which we made within the government, but which is also very much linked to what businesses do and what the knowledge institutions in the Netherlands do, as we have a coordinated approach between the different triangles in the Netherlands. The action plan is actually consists of three layers. We want to capitalize on the opportunities of AI, in particular on the several societal challenges in healthcare and security and food. That's one. The second is we want to create the right conditions. It's about training, getting the right people with the right skills, but also to get the data right, to get the data available, make sure that we have data to work with, to use with as a source for AI, actually. And third, which is actually the theme of today, is to strengthen foundations under our AI policies. And that's about transparency, it's about trust in AI, it's about ensuring that algorithms are not a black box. And we have there the overarching term, which is having a human-centric approach, which is also at the EU level the central theme for AI.
Okay.
Excellent, thank you. So I come at this very much from a practitioner's perspective. So one of my companies is taking the data that's emitted from mobile and sensor-based devices to be able to objectively measure motor state when applied to objective symptom measurement of Parkinson's disease, orthopedic, or early indication of, say, congestive heart failure. What's really interesting about that is that data is driving a digital transformation in terms of models of care and fundamentally transforming the economics of healthcare. But all of this great potential, this great opportunity, it can be stifled if the organizations and the stakeholders in that ecosystem cannot demonstrate responsibility, cannot be accountable for how such data is acquired, consumed, transformed, and shared. And that's where the other hat I'm wearing in DEX is addressing this, because DEX has been developing a trust framework to provide a common language, a common grammar, so organizations can discuss and speak to each other around what an asset is, access controls, provenance, etc., but also provide the tooling to support open standards around interoperable open data ecosystems. So you don't have to have one governing body control everything, just like in this sort of the world shipping container example, you can have an ecosystem where everybody can interoperate because they now have some confidence around certain standards of what a data asset is, what is an operation that can be evoked, and what is an outcome that can be registered and consumable, and using blockchain and all the buzzwords that you can throw at it. So at the core of a lot of the things that concern us is provenance, provenance, provenance. how can I trust those original raw materials that generated these wonderful outputs to generate these wonderful outcomes being powered by AI?
Yeah, so Element AI is a young organization. We just celebrated our third birthday. We were founded on the belief that AI should help people and machine work smarter together. We do this by helping people derive better insights from data, make better decisions, make decisions that have tangible impact, and ultimately focus on things that have the most value and that are the most meaningful. One of the areas that we help our customers with is to really think about what it means to deploy AI models at scale and that keep working once they are deployed. So how do you make sure that they keep doing what they are trained to do? That involves building in the kind of monitoring mechanisms to make sure that they don't deviate from training conditions, that they remain fair, and that we can develop the language between the model and the human so that a relationship of trust can build in that. So we mainly help organizations think about those issues, but we also engage with policymakers to inform and shape what should be the proper regulatory guidelines for society around those issues.
So guys, what is the most pressing issue facing AI ethics and data governance right now?
Shall I say something about that? I think we are actually still learning. It's a new, AI is actually a new technology. And we do not yet know where is the balance between the benefits, the opportunities that it has, and where are the potential risks. We know that both sides are there, and it's the role of government to find that balance. And we are actually experimenting at the moment to find the balance to how should we make it possible to use all to reap all the benefits from AI, to get all the innovations, get all the opportunities that come from that, but at the same time ensure that people trust what's coming out, trust what's happening, that they have control over the data, and that the possible downside of using AI, that people do not actually trust what's coming out, and that the machine is deciding things that people don't want, that we limit that. But we don't know exactly where is the balance between the two, and how to, if we want to regulate that, how to regulate that.
Yeah, Daryl?
So I mentioned earlier the importance of provenance. How can I trust that raw material, that piece of data? So when we're deploying one of our models, we're objectively predicting this particular motor state of dyskinesia in the case of Parkinson's. That prediction is then being used to steer medications. This is an important issue. Now, that model is being developed on data that's been provided by patients with Parkinson's disease. But that's just not good enough. I need to understand basically the protocol that the clinicians went through in capturing that data. I need to know the actual activities that they went through. I need to know exactly the sensors and the quality of those sensors. All of this is critically important. And I need to ensure that that model was trained on that data and that data only, and not other data sets that may have spoiled it. And even the deeper context of the ethnicity of the individual, because that can have significant impact depending on whether the patient is from Western European or from sort of Chinese ethnicity. So understanding the provenance and having trust in that is absolutely critical. And as you take these models out, to market and commercialize them, to be able to point to a lineage, to be able to point to what we refer to as some form of digital supply line that is incorruptible, can never be changed, fully verifiable, is absolutely critical if you're going to have trust in this system.
Yeah, and perhaps to build on that, we see the debate on AI ethics evolving and shifting as our attention builds a deeper understanding of what the real issues are, right? So a few years ago, a lot of the debate was around data privacy, which remains an important question, and this was brought to the fore by the Cambridge Analytica scandal and other major data leaks that have been part of the news. And this remains an important issue, especially since AI can draw inferences from, let's say, your public behavior and arrive at conclusions that you would never have willingly divulged to the public. So that is one important issue. But as we get into AI models that are more and more powerful, we see that issues like fairness need to be really given great attention, great consideration. The field of machine learning arose with a view towards optimization. You're trying to optimize the accuracy of a classification. The model does not care if it's being fair to women, to minorities, or to other protected groups in making its classification. And to Daryl's point, if your training data was selected either from a behavior that is or a process that is intrinsically biased or not representative of the entire population or how the model is going to be deployed, we know mathematically that those decisions are going to be biased and unfair. So essentially, we need to have explicit safeguards and have explicit constraints in place to make sure that the model, for example, when it makes a mistake, it does not disproportionately make mistake about women or about black people or about people that we want to protect in a society.
Sure,
Yeah, I
Daryl.
just wanted to make a further comment on ethics. So many insurance companies will issue a wearable for you to wear so you can demonstrate that you're being active and doing the right things by your well-being. And actually, the individual has very little knowledge on how much data is or not being collected. And if not now, very soon, high-resolution data will be streamed up into the cloud for people to analyze. So while I may have given consent for you to validate that I'm being active, so I can get a better premium for my policy or benefits, some bright spark in that your insurance company might go, I've just found a model for identifying people with Parkinson's disease. I've got some longitude data. Let me just run to see who's got PD or early symptoms, and then notify my policy holder in the health space, to say this is a risk, etc. This is significant concerns from ethics. Now, technology can address a lot of this, but these topics need to be discussed. And I think only when people really understand the type of data that we are able to collect, and very soon in the future, we will have so much more we cannot imagine, we start to ask these really interesting questions.
Yeah, so basically, to summarize, it is the data collection. The data is making sure the data that you've collected is accurate, it isn't biased in any way, and at the end of it, if you have kind of all ticked all the safeguards, ticked all the steps you needed to do, the public will trust in the technology, and we wouldn't have so many concerns on AI ethics and data governance. So I guess that kind of brings me to my next question. How is the world doing on that front? How are we doing on protecting people's data or collecting people's data in a correct way? And what role should the government play or regulators play on this front? Maybe you, Maarten, you can answer.
Well, we've started there already with some steps. You talked about data privacy. At European level, there is, of course, the GDPR regulation on data protection, which gives people control over the data and protects them from not being used in the wrong way, in a way that you have not given consent to. So that's one standard that is already there, at least at EU level, and we see that it's being applied worldwide by a number of companies and also countries as a new kind of standard. We are currently also discussing the issue of data sharing, which is maybe a bit contradictory to data protection, but knowing that certain companies have the availability over a large amount of data where they can monopolize certain markets or they can prevent others from innovating on the basis of that data, The question is whether we should not make it more possible and maybe oblige companies to share data with each other. That is certainly the case when there's a kind of public interest, but very often it's also, you can do it on a voluntary basis where it's in the interest of companies to share their data and to use the data to innovate and to come up with new solutions or to prevent certain risks there are. And the third is maybe even more vague, you might say, more in preliminary stage. That is the really ethical side. At EU level, we have the ethical guidelines, 7 of them, and they are now being experimented on a group of 500 organizations, public and private. And we'll see in the beginning of next year what comes out of that, and then see whether a next step will be taken on the basis of that result.
What sort of ethical guidelines would you put in?
They are on transparency, on making sure that people have control over the data, and on knowing what the algorithm does. The algorithm has to be open, so it's that kind of guidelines.
Got it. Guys, do you have any thoughts?
Yes. So the role of government should. There is a role, of course, for very broad-based regulatory frameworks, like GDPR, for example, or the recent recommendations of the European Commission high-level expert group on AI, on which, by the way, our CEO, Jeff Gagné, was the only non-European participant to inform the discussions. There are some broad recommendations that we know are broadly applicable. But I think each sector of the economy will also come up with its own framework and its own set of guidelines based on the risks and the benefits trade-offs that apply to that specific sector. So the trade-offs in financial services, for example, are quite different from those in retail and quite different from those in aviation, for example. And so what this means is that we, on top of those broad frameworks, we will see an evolution of industry-specific policy recommendations, and the way that this can take form can range from internal best practices inside companies, maybe industry-wide self-regulatory bodies, all the way to government laws and transnational policy. Depending on the risks, the cost of the downside, the cost of a bad event occurring, weighted against the benefits of deploying AI and the benefits that come from innovation and the ability to try out very, very quickly multiple different alternatives without being weighted down by excess and regulation that is too early and not enlightened enough.
What is that one best practice you feel like every company should exercise when it comes to data and AI? So, on top of data privacy and basic data security, obviously, which is a complete prerequisite, for us, a basic standard of hygiene, if you will, of model hygiene is to always monitor models as they are deployed to make sure that the conditions on which they are applied broadly match the training conditions, so that you don't get this divergence in behavior between the time at which you put the model in practice versus the completeness of the training set on which you train the data. For us, this is like kindergarten. It's the basic step. Very, very sadly, it's not applied often enough yet. Some of the things that we do at Element AI is to help companies build the internal muscle and equip them with the tools and technologies to make that more streamlined and apply at scale. But we see this as only a first step towards a much more comprehensive AI governance. Interesting. So Daryl, you deal with data as well. Would you have your top best practice you feel like companies should always exercise when it comes to data?
Yes, this is probably a strange thing for me to say, but actually I think heavily regulated markets are our friend. The reason why I say that is because they give us certainty. And so in this emerging space, we've got to take small steps of progress. And if it's too broad and too wide, it just explodes your brain. So heavily regulated gives us certainty. It gives us the guidelines. We can then apply trust frameworks where there's a lot of common understanding between all of the actors in the ecosystem. So when you then propose standards around sort of basic concepts like asset, provenance, metadata, invoking an operation, they all can get around that quite quickly, and you can see progress in implementation. So when it comes to data governance, AI, start with heavily regulated industries like health, like financial services, and increasingly digital media, which is quite fun, to really tackle.
Seems like you're a fan of government regulation.
100% in this context.
Yeah. Speaking of government regulation, I mean, from a government point of view, has it been very difficult to regulate a technology that's constantly shifting? You know, AI models, new AI models come out every week. People post their results on archive. You know, someone takes it, and bam, you have a new algorithm.
Yeah, sure.
So, how do you regulate technology that moves?
That's the phase where we're in. I mean, I very much understand that it would be helpful to have heavy regulated, heavy regulation on this. But the problem is that we don't know yet exactly how to do it. And we know some basic things, and we have already done some basic things. But at the same time, we are worried that if we regulate too much, we might actually stop the innovation. And we want to benefit from the innovations and from the positive impact that AI can have. That's the struggle that we're in. That's the experimental phase that we're in with regulation. That's why, for example, with the ethical guidelines, it's only guidelines. It's an experiment. It's not yet any regulation. It's not said that regulation will be there. We'll see. And there are two things are for sure. We want to prevent the most serious risks, and that's why transparency is so key, and I keep saying that. And we want to ensure that the benefits and the positive impact of AI on healthcare, for example, that we really can benefit from that and that we can reap those benefits, because that's what society is looking for.
Nicolas, what do you think from a company's point of view? You know, where do we find the balance between overregulation and underregulation?
So the field of machine learning is evolving tremendously rapidly, as you mentioned. It's important not to regulate around specific model or specific technologies, but really, regulate what are the uses that are made of it. We are very, very strong believers in starting with internal frameworks, governance frameworks that companies can establish to make sure that their operations remain under control, essentially, and that they can be fair towards all their stakeholders as they deploy AI technologies. And as we understand more of the consequences of the downsides, the potential risks, we are in a better position to have a conversation as a society to decide what are the risks that, as a society, we're not willing to take, and that we should regulate those. We're quite far along in this conversation in areas like GDPR, for example, around privacy. But now it's time to broaden the conversation to things like fairness. With recent incidents that have made the news with a famous technology company and a famous bank releasing a credit card that was biased towards a certain segment of the population.
Yeah. Daryl, you had something to say?
Yeah, so just being based in Singapore, I think the sandbox environment that Singapore provides allows for a lot of that innovation, exploration. And I was just going to comment that you've got main principles around some of the regulations. So, for example, health, personally identifiable data cannot move from that jurisdiction. So that then spurs innovation in bringing the algorithms to the data, for example, or decentralized federated learning, which actually is the best outcome because nobody wants to lose control of the data anyway. So centralized approaches to data hosting, for example, is just generally bad because people lose control. So actually keeping that with you is good. and think of that data as the raw material, the raw asset that enables all of this opportunity is the great starting point.
All very interesting. So I would like to bring up a topic that kind of personally resonates with me on how we keep talking about ethics, but truthfully, what is ethical to me might not be ethical to Maarten, might not be ethical to Nicolas, might not be ethical to Daryl. I mean, the world has a different definition of what ethics is. It's very closely tied to our values, it's tied to our culture. Just having that in mind, how do we reconcile this? Are we going to see a bifurcated development of an ethical framework? So the developed West will have their version of what an ethical framework is, and maybe more authoritarian states like China will have their own version of an ethical framework. What are your thoughts?
To my mind, the ethics of AI is no different from the ethics of any other technology. Each society will make its own choices based on its traditions, its culture, and the set of values that it judges to be more important. I think the set of important human values does not change, but the ranking might change across different societies. And this is to be expected. AI ethics will fit within these different conceptions across different societies. The broad principles, however, I believe will remain the same across all the environments. It is not true that citizens in China do not care about data privacy. They do care a lot about data privacy, but maybe they value convenience in certain situations a bit higher than a German citizen would value convenience. So we should not come to this with preconceptions about the ranking of our preferences.
Yeah, but I mean,
I'm
being
really
sorry.
Lisa, so sorry, but we really need to end this session already because
sorry.
we're overrunning quite a bit.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, thank
Yeah,
you.
no idea. Maybe they can wrap up with very quick answers on this topic.
So I was just gonna say that there's this concept called legitimate interest. So, for example, if you have a smart home which is being used to provide a safety net for an older adult to live independently alone, so if something wrong happens, an alert goes out to loved ones. But there could be a legitimate interest if you know that there's a risk that the way that that person lives their life, they might leave the stove on, that could cause a fire, that could then put at risk everybody else living along that corridor up and above. So using AI to be able to predict and infer such a thing could happen, there could be a legitimate interest for that application for the safety of many people. And these are deep and difficult conversations that need to be thought through. I'm not saying which one is right or wrong, but they need to be discussed and considered because we are at this time now.
Well, very brief. I think, yes, there may be different concepts of the ethical values around AI, but I can echo what Nicolas has said. That's the case with different technologies, and we have found ways in the world to apply different values to different technologies. And for this technology, it's important that we know what's actually happening. There's transparency coming again. We have to know what the algorithms are doing, what they look like, so that in every jurisdiction you can actually see whether it's compliant with the values that you have. And we have, with the GDPR, set a standard in Europe, which may be different from standards in other areas of the world, and we are able to do that. So it can be different. We hope it will be the same everywhere, but if not, there are lots of examples where it can be different as well.
Yeah, because I felt there is an uncanny resemblance to the regulation of the internet, regulation of AI and internet. So thank you very much. I'm very sorry for overrunning.